So most business leaders don't have a problem setting goals or objectives. I think they have a real problem around clarity. And those two things might sound the same, but they're actually very different. Setting a goal is quite easy, but genuinely being clear on what that goal means and who owns it and what success looks like and what you do when you're off track, that's the hard part. And most businesses, they're failing at the second one, not the first. They've big ambitions, setting objectives, but those objectives keep changing quite willy-nilly. So a couple of years ago, we were running a planning session with a leadership team, amazing business, really smart leaders. They were doing quite well from a revenue standpoint, doing about 3 million a year. And we asked each person in the room to write down the 3 most important business goals for the next 12 months. 6 people, 6 answers, not slightly different answers, completely different ones. So when we got this back, different priorities, different time horizons, different definitions of what success actually looks like at the end of the year. And what's really interesting is we make sure that when we're running this exercise, it's to create alignment. So we want the leaders to do this exercise in isolation, and then we bring everyone back into the room. And the thing that stuck with me wasn't that they disagreed, it was that they genuinely didn't know they disagreed. They didn't know what success looked like from each other's perspective. They'd been working together, for 2 years, sitting in the same meetings, reviewing the same reports, and they were all operating off a different version of the plan. Here's the pattern I see in business after working with close to 250 businesses now over the last 10 years. Being an agency, you get exposure to a huge amount of businesses and their growth and their journey and where they're headed, what their North Star is. And what we find is it's not the team that doesn't care. It's not that the strategy is wrong. It's the goal. It exists primarily in the founder's head, and everyone else is working off a rough interpretation of them. But if the founder, and in this particular case, we would say had a bit too much shiny object syndrome, it means that they're always changing their ideas and that the rest of the leaders are trying to constantly interpret what that change is next. So the founder assumes alignment because no one is visibly pushing back, but the team assumes alignment because I suppose no one is openly disagreeing. But when you actually test it, when you ask people to be specific about the numbers, the timelines, the ownership, the alignment, it falls apart almost immediately. And the reason this matters so much is that accountability can't function in that level of environment. You can't hold someone accountable for an outcome that hasn't been defined precisely enough for them to know whether they're going to hit it. So without that precision, what you end up with isn't accountability, it's this reoccurring conversation about expectations, and those conversations are just really exhausting. Harvard Business Review published research showing that fewer than 10% of employees could accurately name their organization's top 3 strategic priorities. And I know that sounds very extreme, but honestly, based on what I've seen working with a lot of leadership teams over the last 10 years, it definitely tracks. Most leadership teams are working very hard, but they're working hard on their version of the objective or the goal, which may or may not be the same as the version their other leaders have in mind or the founders have in mind. And alignment is arguably one of the biggest issues that we see across the board. And that cost of the gap isn't just strategic and a drift in strategic thinking. It shows up in wasted meetings, slow decisions, the kind of low-level friction that everyone in the business can feel, but nobody can quite name. So let me ask you a few things. If you're listening to this and and this resonates, I want you to actually think about these rather than just move past them. If I called 3 people on your leadership team right now, I rang them on the mobile without any warning and asked them to tell me the 3 most important business outcomes for the year, would I get the same answer from all 3? Answer that honestly in your head now. Not roughly the same, actually the same, with the same numbers and the same timelines. Have a think about that. When you look at goals you've set for this year, does each one have a specific number attached to it? A specific date, a specific person who would own it? Or do they exist at a level of a direction rather than an actual commitment? So again, I want you to just think about that question for a second. When a key metric moves in the wrong direction, does your team immediately know what action to take? Or does it kick off a meeting where you first have to have a debate over this, what the number means before you can even talk about what to do about it? And the last question I'd like to ask you is, when did you last have a very honest, numbers on the table conversation with your leadership team about what's actually on track and what isn't? So what are your growth levers? What are your growth bottlenecks? Your leading and lagging indicators, like really talking about from a data-driven perspective. So I think those questions will spark some good initiative and some good action. And the answers will tell you a lot about how your business is actually operating versus how you think it's operating. And here's a way I think about solving this. And I want to give you a bit of a mental model that you can take away from this episode. I call it the signal goal stack. And the core idea is quite straightforward. Your goals or your objectives don't fail because people aren't motivated or because the strategy is wrong. They fail because the feedback signal, the actual information that tells people whether they're on track or not, isn't clear enough or fast enough for them to course correct before it's too late. So think about it like this. If the only driving feedback that you received was a monthly report telling you whether you stayed in your lane, no real time information, no immediate indicators, just a summary at the end of the month, you would crash constantly. Not because I suppose you're a bad driver, but because the signal is too slow and too vague to act on. And that is almost exactly how most businesses manage their goals and their objectives. Monthly reviews of data that's already 3 or 4 weeks old, by which point the moment to intervene has usually passed. So the signal goal stack has 3 layers, and I want to walk you through each one of those clearly. So the first layer is direction. This is your 12-month target. And the critical thing here is that it needs to be singular, not a list of 8 different things that you want to achieve this year, but one number or at least 2 that define what winning looks like for the end of the year. And then you need to break that down by your individual quarters, and then your months, and then your weeks and your days, okay? Now, your objective is not to do the quarters, the months, the weeks, and the days. It's to do the 12-month outcome and objective and goal that you want to strive towards. You can get involved in those quarterly meetings. I would highly advise that. But the monthly and the weekly and the daily is for management and other employees that you've got your makers and you've got your managers. That should be handled by them. So I suppose the main thing for us and the key principle is that it has to be specific enough that on the last day of the year, there's no ambiguity about whether you hit it or not. The reason this matters is when businesses set 8 or 10 goals for the year, what they're actually doing, whether they intended it or not, is setting no goals. When everything is equally important, the team's attention gets divided across all of it. And nothing gets a layer of focus. Of course, you're going to have other objectives. Each team is going to have their own objectives, and that's absolutely fine. But we need one clear direction that forces a level of overall prioritization in a way that a long list of objectives are just not going to do. So the second layer is the signal metric. So these are the 3 to 5 numbers that tell you on a weekly basis whether you're on track to hit your direction. And the distinction I want to draw here is between signal metrics and activity metrics. Because most businesses, they track the wrong thing. Activity metrics tell you what people are doing, but signal metrics tell you whether those people are doing it or what they're doing is if it's working or not. So if your direction is, let's say, 4 million this year, and you're running let's say a service business that targets B2B companies, your signal metric might be qualified pipeline value, average deal size, close rate, and average time to close, or the sales cycle. And those 4 numbers reviewed every week give you almost everything you need to know about whether you're going to hit your yearly target or not. You don't need a 40 metric dashboard. You need those key 4 numbers. And here's the non-negotiable about the signal metric. Each one needs an owner, not a team responsible for it, not shared accountability. Just put one person's name beside those numbers. In our company, we have people can manage up to 3 to 4 metrics that we're constantly tracking, and then it just makes sure that we all know who's owning what. And we really encourage that with our clients as well. We call it a CEO scorecard, and it's the CEO. Our CEO comes in, and we have a variety of leaders joining those meetings across our client side of the business, our operations side of the business, our growth side of the business, and we all own numbers. So the person is responsible for, obviously knowing the number, but then flagging when it moves and understanding why it's moved. So it creates that shared accountability in practice, and almost always brings together a sort of a RevOps structure and separates this siloed structure that we see quite a lot in businesses. The third layer is threshold, and this is one that most businesses skip, which is a big problem because it's arguably the most important part of the whole system. A threshold is the point at which a metric doesn't just get noted in a report, it triggers a specific pre-agreed action, not a conversation about what to do, not a meeting to review the situation, an action that's been decided in advance. So let me give you a concrete example. Say your close rate normally sits at 25%. You set that threshold. If the close rate drops to 15% for 2 consecutive weeks, it automatically triggers a review and an audit on those sales calls. And we need to see where the objection handling is becoming an issue. Because objection handling typically tells you what is the constraint. So let's say we review those calls, and with AI now, it's so easy to review calls and see pattern recognition and understand where the constraint lies. Let's say it's within pricing, then you're going to do a pricing review. And that decision about what to do and what happens after a problem occurs, that is also so important. So it's setting those thresholds and understanding what we need to do, what actions we need to do in order to resolve that constraint. So when the metric hits that threshold, the response isn't, oh, let's go discuss this in a meeting and have a debate over it. You're already knowing what you need to do, because it should run like a feedback loop. Each department should run like a feedback loop. You're scaling with systems here. You're using systems to your advantage. You're leveraging AI to facilitate you in becoming a more informed business and not having these long debates. the reason thresholds are really powerful is that without them, every metric that moves in the wrong direction kicks off a debate. And what does this mean? It means, you trend on just creating a lot of noise between teams and bringing people into conversations that aren't really necessary. Should we be worried? Who's responsible? And that debate, which often is less about finding the answer, is more about managing the discomfort of not having one. So it consumes a hell of a lot of time, a hell of a lot of energy, and should be going into fixing the problem, the constraint that we're talking about. So thresholds replace that debate with a decision that's already been made, and the signal becomes binary. So above thresholds or below threshold. And binary signals don't invite interpretation. Interpretation and assumption is not what we want to bring here. We want to bring a data-driven approach. So I hope this was helpful. I think I want to be direct about saying, in the current state, actually, I think it's easy to treat this as a nice to have improvement rather than a business critical issue. But I would probably argue that this compounds massively over time. If you are becoming more data driven as a business, if you are starting to bring and challenge these conversations with leaders and using data to your advantage, I really think this is going to help you to create a business that changes the behavior and drives results, only functions when, people know precisely what they're accountable for. You can't hold someone accountable for a vague outcome, and you can't hold yourself accountable for a goal that hasn't been defined clearly enough to know whether you're actually going to hit it or not. So what you end up with instead is a performance culture built on effort rather than outcomes, which feels busy, but rarely moves the business forward. It moves the needle forward in the business. So we're building with a signal goal stack that is going to help to bring everyone together. It's a decision infrastructure, a system that removes that level of noise, makes the signal a lot more clear, and gives people the information that they need to act with confidence rather than waiting for permission. So when the signal is clearer, decisions will start to come a lot faster. And when decisions come faster, execution will start to improve. And when execution improves, the numbers improve. And that's the chain. That's the feedback loop that you want. And it starts with being really specific enough about what you're chasing and how you'll know when you're on track or when you're off track. It's not complicated work, but it does require a level of brain power and a systemized approach to do the uncomfortable thing of committing specifically to something, putting a real number on it, and naming the owners of the metrics that are going to get you there, and deciding in advance what you'll do when things break. That level of discipline, more than any strategy or any technology that you bring into your business, is what separates businesses that execute from businesses that just talk about executing. So I hope this episode was helpful. See you in the next one.